Today on the Hot Zone, activists in New York protest CNN for the firing of Mark Lamont Hill.
Israel is not a people.
It's not a people.
It's not a country.
It's not a country.
Meanwhile, rockets from Palestinian territory rain down on Israel on an almost daily basis. And tax hikes in France continue to be popular with the working man. Not. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is the Hot Zone.
Welcome to the Hot Zone podcast with Chuck Holton, an experienced war correspondent who has covered wars and disasters for more than 15 years. Holton gives you a rundown of what the media isn't telling you about crisis around the world and lets you join him in doing something positive to help those who need it the most. Come along and engage with the news in a whole new way with Chuck Holton in the Hot Zone.
Thanks for being with us. So this is our second episode of the Hot Zone, and the reason I put this together was because I've had so many people just make requests that we get more from us, more content out of us about crisis and war and disaster areas around the world. I've noticed that there's no place out there doing this, so we decided we're going to give it a try. And hopefully it will get better than this one, but you got to start someplace. So a military parade was announced for Baghdad because the government of Iraq is now celebrating on the 10th of December today, making it a public holiday, the first anniversary of their victory over ISIS. Now, ISIS is still a threat in that country, but it's a lot better than it was. I was in Iraq in 2014, just after ISIS took over the second largest city there of Mosul, and they were pushing south towards Baghdad. But now there are places that are actually getting better. Most people have kind of forgotten that we still have about 6,000 U.S. troops on the ground in Iraq. But during my last trip down there, I traveled around with a businessman who was actually growing his business in Iraq in probably some of the worst environments in the world. Now, check this package out because it's still very valid, and it really makes a lot of sense today. When the plane landed for my fourth trip to Baghdad, things had changed dramatically since my last visit here in 2007. Nobody wore body armor. There was actually a customs and immigration line. The airport looked surprisingly normal. I met my translator and we drove past Camp Victory, once home to thousands of U.S. troops, now just an empty shell of what it once was. Along Baghdad Airport Road, driving toward downtown, traffic was light. It's hard to believe this was once called the most dangerous stretch of pavement on the planet. On this day, headlines warned ISIS terrorists were only a few kilometers from Baghdad International. While there were some soldiers, no one seemed especially concerned. I stayed in the center of the city, just across the street from an amusement park in full swing. Hardly what you'd expect from a city under siege. I met up with Mike Douglas, CEO of global logistics company SKA International.
SKA have been in Iraq since 2003. Originally we came in on a contract for refurbishment of airports. Since that time we've grown into many different areas of operation, particularly in fuel supply, logistics and aviation.
SKA currently has over 3,500 fuel trucks operating throughout the country. While other companies have been scared off by the threat of ISIS, SKA has no plans to leave.
The current situation is being overhyped by the media. We're pretty much business as usual. That's not to underestimate the seriousness of what's going on elsewhere in the country, and we ourselves have faced some serious challenges in the north. But I think the key to our success is understanding what's going on the ground, developing relationships with key people, with decision makers, and understanding the true facts of what's happening within the region.
The next morning, we drove 4 hours south to the city of Basra. There, we met with leaders of the Al-Batat tribe, marsh Arabs who were terribly persecuted under Saddam Hussein.
The situation in Iraq is stable and all secure, and the life going normal and everything going well. And all the tribes, they are supporting the government here, and all the people here, the community, Sunni or Shia or Christian people, we are all same. We are all Iraqi. There is no difference between us, and we live together from long time.
Concerning the possibility of ISIS taking over Baghdad, these sheikhs say it simply won't happen.
They have no anyone to support them in anything. So before they think to touch our area, believe me, they all will be dead.
Here in southern Iraq, things have gotten pretty stable. As a matter of fact, there hasn't been a terrorist event in this area for over a year. At this fuel depot south of Basra, a small group of contractors is doing a job that used to be done by the U.S. military. That is, sending fuel to all the power stations in Iraq to keep the lights on. And in that way, they're helping to take the fight to ISIS.
America's still here in Iraq. People don't know it, but I'm an American. I'm from Missouri, and proud to be here, and we're doing all we can. Majority of logistics work, the support, fuel support, food, transportation, mail, all of that was done by the U.S. military. And since then, contractors have literally taken over majority of logistics work and a majority of the security work here in Iraq.
The combined experience here is greater than most military officers because these men typically stay here for years, so they bring an important perspective to the current crisis.
ISIS is definitely a threat we have to take seriously, but ISIS is more of an ideology. In order to fight this, in order to beat it, you really have to know what the facts are on the ground, and only by dealing with the local people, with the people who understand the complexity of what goes on in Iraq, only by understanding that will we have any chance of defeating it.
The U.S. military pullout in 2011 didn't end the war, and the enemy here has reorganized and is back in force. This time, contractors are taking the lead in helping the Iraqi government deal with the threat. That just means American boots on the ground won't necessarily be military. In Iraq, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News. So unlike Afghanistan, Iraqi forces can fight now and kind of stand on their own 2 feet to help protect their own country, while the U.S. role in Iraq is really more of just kind of advise and assist. They don't want to be on the front lines. We don't want U.S. servicemen getting killed. And what I've seen in more recent trips to Iraq is that the United States is offering a lot of intelligence support. They're offering, like I said, advice, but Iraqis don't always follow that advice. And so it's kind of hard to say whether or not the U.S. presence there is really doing that much good. One thing that can be said is that a lot of the things that U.S. troops had been doing, like you saw in that piece just now, are now being done by contractors, both from the United States and from elsewhere around the world. So it's important to keep our eyes on Iraq. The media doesn't really want to talk about it a whole lot because there aren't any American servicemen getting killed over there. And, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads. So in other news, CNN contributor, I guess he's a professor at Temple University. His name's Mark Lamont Hill. He was speaking at a UN meeting the other day and was supporting the Palestinians and said that he would like to see a Palestinian state. He used this quote, "from the river to the sea." Now, CNN got a lot of pushback over that because that phrase, "from the river to the sea," really is talking about, it's something that's been used for decades by the Palestinians to talk about wiping out Israel as a state and having a Palestinian state from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And so CNN got a lot of pushback from that. They cut ties with Mark Lamont Hill, but now they're getting pushback on the pushback from the left. Check this out.
Here. We are here in support. We are here in support
of Dr. Mark Lamont Hill.
Of Dr. Mark Lamont Hill.
And we are outraged.
And we are outraged
that CNN. Terminated. Dr. Hill.
Dr. Hill.
Over his comments.
At
the United Nations.
So I don't get this whole repeat after me business. I've seen this at a lot of left-wing protests and marches and stuff. It seems to be kind of a tradition. I still don't understand it. To me, it just weirds me out. But you know what's even weirder? The fact that Marc Lamont Hill made those remarks at a special meeting of a group at the United Nations, which is called the Committee on the Exercise of Inalienable Rights for the Palestinian People. Now, get that? A committee on the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. So they're very concerned about the Palestinians' inalienable rights. Unfortunately, the UN doesn't seem all that concerned about our inalienable rights, specifically our right to self-defense. That is the U.S. Second Amendment, because the UN very regularly denounces the freedom that we have to own a firearm here in the United States and pushes for gun control all around the world. So apparently those inalienable rights are kind of like most rights on the left, and that is, they're good for me, but not as good for thee. Now, in Gaza, at the same time that this meeting was going on, Palestinians were busy lobbing rockets at civilians inside Israel. And this was last month. Watch this video. Not only that, last week Israeli forces found terror tunnels being dug from Lebanon underneath the border into the Israeli homeland. Now, this is something that's been very common. They regularly find these tunnels. The last time I was in Israel, we went out and saw a special unit of the Israeli military, and that's all they did is look for these tunnels. And they had special equipment that drilled holes into the ground at intervals and tried to find those tunnels. When they found them, they just dropped grenades down the holes and blew the tunnels up. There was a press release this week from the IDF that said that every third house in Lebanon had some tie to terror. That is Hezbollah there, supported by the Iranians on the Lebanese border. They've turned almost every house, or one out of every three houses, according to the Israelis, into either like a supply depot or a place for terrorists to hang out or a fighting position or something like that. Now, I don't know how true that is, but I think it is very true to say that Israel is still surrounded by enemies and they need as much support as they can get. Now, let's go on to talk about France. There were more riots by the Yellow Vest protesters over the weekend. The media is giving us very simplistic reasons for these protests. Basically, they're saying that people are just fed up with a proposed gasoline tax by the French president, Emmanuel Macron. I think that's a little too simplistic. Here's a good example of some of the interviews coming from Al Jazeera over the weekend of people that were involved in these protests.
Dignity is all we want. The dignity of making a living out of our work.
How are the poor going to keep feeding their children? That's what I want to know. What will we give to our children by the end of the month?
Now, like I say, I think it's a little too simplistic to just blame these riots on Joe Sixpack because he's mad that the price of diesel is going to go up. They're already paying over $7 a gallon for gas, so what's another 50 cents? That is part of the problem for sure, because it's especially the blue-collar workers who have to drive a truck to work or something like that are angry about these taxes. But that's only part of the story. See, these guys are not exactly conservatives. It's not like they're the Tea Party of France. What I mean by that is these guys are actually pushing for more wealth taxes on the rich to take the place of the gasoline taxes that Macron is proposing. Now, these are the taxes they're talking about, wealth taxes. They're not just more income taxes on the rich. They're actually taxes on their net worth of people who have a certain net worth and above. And that is a pretty scary thing. That's something that has been tried before, and it doesn't work very well. It basically just consumes the wealth of the richest people in the society, and that is a direct hit on the number of jobs they can create, the number of companies they can start, things like that. But not only that, I don't think French President Emmanuel Macron will really be against wealth taxes all that much, although he cut them already once he was elected. But more because Macron is signing on to the Paris Accords that, if you read these reports, actually call for an increasing wealth tax, an increasing tax on gasoline, all the way up to, by the end of this century, get this, a maximum of $240 a gallon in taxes. Now, raise your hand if you'd be willing to pay an extra $240 a gallon to fill your car. If they even started down that road, they're going to see a lot more of the kinds of protests and violent riots that they saw in Paris over the last several weeks. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. What they're saying, that it would take that kind of tax on gasoline to meet the goal of keeping the climate from warming only 1.5 degrees. Now, personally, I'd rather just wear shorts a day or two early than have to deal with a $240 gas tax. And again, these Paris Accords really are not going to work simply because the vast majority of the world, whether or not they signed on to them, is not going to abide by them. We already see that in China. I mean, China's coal usage is 4 times that of the United States, up to 4 billion tons of coal a year that China is using right now. And if the United States stopped using fossil fuels altogether, the increase that we would see out of China and India over the next 30 years would more than make up for what we use in fossil fuels already. So it just doesn't make sense to tax the snot out of people, but you have to keep in mind that Barack Obama, this is my opinion now, I was in France when Barack Obama was campaigning essentially for Emmanuel Macron when he was running for president. And, you know, the left makes such a big deal, and rightly so, over collusion or over the meddling by Russia in our elections. But if it's a bad thing for Russia to meddle in our elections, I don't see how it's not a bad thing for us to meddle in the elections of other countries. But we do it all the time. And that especially happened under Barack Obama in France. And it helped Macron get elected without a doubt. And part of the reason for that Obama liked Macron so much is because Obama was a true believer when it came to these Paris Accords. And he would have gladly continued to raise taxes on U.S. fuel and U.S. coal and things like that to try to pay for those kinds of carbon taxes. But thankfully, we got Donald Trump. He has pulled out of the Paris Accords. And look, we are already making great strides in becoming more fuel efficient. And I don't think we need some kind of fake accords that half the world is going to sign on to but not follow to make us do that. Okay, we're going to get better at our fuel economy one way or the other. So that's my opinion there. But that's all for now. Watch me on NRA TV today, or you can see me on CBN, where I have reports on a regular basis. You can follow me on YouTube if you just look up Chuck Holton, The Hot Zone. Or we're going to be on iTunes. And if you want to take part in what we're doing here, if you want to actually contribute to what we're doing, you can go to patreon.com/hotzone. And that is a place where you can actually contribute. What we're going to do is we're going to save up those contributions, and we're going to use them to find somebody who's having the worst day of their life, and we're going to turn that into their best day of their life, and you get to be a part of it. Now, you can find this podcast on hotzone.podbean.com, or again, just look us up on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. So please do us a favor, wherever you listen to it, subscribe and like our podcast. That'll help us in the ratings. Again, we're just getting started at this, but we're going to keep it up, and I hope you like it. We're going to have a great time together. Thanks for being here with us today, and join us tomorrow in the Hot Zone. I'm Chuck Holton.
This has been The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. Produced by Amy Holton. Copyright 2019.